implications on our taxes we pay as well. Potentially, we could donate that land to a nature conservancy or something like that and save on, we might lose the luxury of being the largest landholder, tax-paying landholder in the town of Plattsburgh anymore. But
and one of our concerns, though, I mean, if we spend $15 million on a new dam and spillway and all that, I mean, the capital cost is going to be enough of a challenge, but it's going to drive the assessed value of that infrastructure up probably by a factor of 4 or 5, which is going to increase our taxes by a factor of 4 or 5. So when you're spending $300,000 a year on taxes now and you quadruple it or quintuple it, you can do the math and easily see we could be at $1.5 million just in taxes. The
so,
bond payment over 20 or 30 years, that goes away once it's paid. The taxes don't. They're going to keep going up. So that's another big advantage is the financial implications.
and if you recall, we approached the town and asked them if they would work with us on this and try to reduce our tax liability, because after all, the water that comes from your dam is also the same water that we donated for free to put out their fire at Comfort Inn and et cetera. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why one could argue that you're running a public good for the benefit of the entire region, but only the city taxpayers are paying through the nose and potentially paying 5 times more if we further invest in those properties. So this has been a discussion this council's been having for a few years now. So it's really our options are now being created by this well system that John is doing.
John, can you describe for us where these wells are located?
They're located along the west side of the existing Mead Reservoir. So if you head out 374 to Rand Hill Road and you hang a right and head north about a mile, the gateway to the dam is on the left. So it's about 6 miles from the plant out to where the reservoir is actually located. The wells themselves are along the left side of the reservoir. That's where the geology looked best for finding water. It'd be interesting to have our hydrogeologist come sometime and explain it all. He goes back tens of thousands of years ago to when the glaciers were here and how big dams burst up in Canada and washed all kinds of water down here, and he's been able to figure out where these gravel formations that we're looking for, where they were deposited and how to go find them. We drilled a test well on the east side of the reservoir, and basically it was dry hull. So he's been able to piece together his historic knowledge of what everybody thinks happened in geologic times, together with all the hydrogeology that we've collected over the years with test wells and geophysical work and all that, and kind of start to piece together and triangulate where these high yield deposits would be. And not only are they high yield, but they're typically of really good quality too.
That's what I saw you up
Looking
there.
way out to the future, then do you imagine that we would hang on to the reservoirs, or would we try to?
Yeah, well, you know, if we don't get into a situation like with Mead where it needs so much money that it's just cost prohibitive. The Westbrook reservoirs are not as high and they don't have as much water behind them, so they aren't as high of a hazard class, which means the level of spillway size and other things we need to do aren't as great as at Mead. So that makes them a lot expensive to maintain in the long run. But if we got to the point where we needed, $20 million in the Westbrook wells or Westbrook Dam, then we'd be probably looking at more wells. Now, that being said, that Mead Valley, where the reservoir is now, looks really good. The geophysical lines to the north look like they could bear a lot of water, but it's just expensive to run that transmission line up there, and there's no need to do it now. If we get into a situation down the road where the Westbrooks all of a sudden need $10 million worth of work, it's probably less expensive to just extend the new transmission line up and expand the Mead well field.
And remember, this was all motivated by the analysis that it would take $15 or $20 million potentially to repair Mead. So we started exploring other strategies and came up with this one for less than $1 million. So it's really cost effective. Didn't I see you the other day up there with a divining rod?
No, but something like that. Yeah, we've had all kinds of equipment up there. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Jeff,
Yes?
I asked Mark Hamilton to come and give a presentation. Can you arrange for him to do that?
I'll turn her up, sorry. Yeah, just a second, Elizabeth, we can't hear you.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi.
There you go.
Good.
I asked Mark to come in and talk about the PHA officer. Can you make some time for him to do that now? Is that okay?
Well, yeah, well, we can right after we get our reports, reports from the managers. Yeah,
All right.
We can send it in then if you want, right after we get done there.
I can't hear you, Jeff.
Yeah, we can do that right after we finish these reports here.
Okay, all right, sorry,
Yes,
Mark,
you can.
this miscommunication.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth.
Okay, we'll make it quick for you. Since last meeting, we advanced the second phase of the paving projects. So we completed Montcalm, Lafayette, also Williams and Pleasant. It was very successful. It was a busy week, to say the least. Some people were inconvenienced. I apologize for that, but I think overall, I think the end product came out very good, and hopefully everyone's pleased. The other project we had going on is the Ohio Ave water line replacement. The pipe has been installed. The balance of the work is going to be the tie-ins, chlorination and testing, and that should start next Monday. We have moved on to some of our fall activities, which includes maintenance at the Akey landfill and the reservoirs. There'll be mowing. We have done some prep work to our plow fleet. We started pulling out moorings and selected dock sections that aren't being utilized by the boat basin with their approval. The Sailors Beach Bridge, which everyone wants to know about, we have options for steel deck replacement or lumber deck replacement. We'll need to get into depth on that and find out what we want to do for next year and what we can afford. So we're going to have to talk in more length on that. Also over the long weekend, we had 2 water main breaks that happened on Saturday. New Hampshire and Nevada Oval that were put out of service. Both have been repaired. Other than that, we're doing well. Any questions?
Mike, I just have one comment. Ara and I visited a constituent who wanted work done on Underwood Avenue, and
Okay.
that was a few weeks ago. We asked her, and
The railing?
yes, it was done, and it was done well.
Yeah, it was done probably 4 hours after she asked.
She she said, "I hope you do as good a job on the south end as you do on the north or the west side." And I think you did, so
Yep.
I'm sure she's quite happy about that. So thank you very much
Okay.
for taking care of that.
Matt, did you have anything you want to say about the windows or the items on the agenda?
Yeah. So on the agenda are a couple items. I'll start with the City Hall windows. The one resolution includes $385,000 for various improvements to city buildings. The $300,000, one of the constituent parts of that allocation is a DASNY grant to assist with replacement of the City Hall windows. I just want the council to be aware before you approve that $300,000 grant is not estimated to cover the cost of replacing all the windows in City Hall. The most recent estimate we got, which was pre-COVID, between labor, materials, and project management, that total cost is currently estimated at $562,700. So a more detailed discussion about how the council would like us to proceed with that grant, if they would like us to do as many windows as we can with that existing grant funding and then seek additional funds outside of the city to finish the remainder, or if the council is prepared to allocate the necessary additional general fund money to complete that, is a conversation that we would have to have. Any questions on that one?
Could we hear from, I know that Mr. Bissett researched not doing, or doing modern windows rather than.
Well, that's what Matt had researched for the 560,000. They went a step farther than Lena, and Matt worked on it. And that is using, they went back to the design engineer, right, Matt?
Yep.
And that 560,000 is an estimate you need replicas as opposed to rehabs.
Because the rehab was considerably more expensive and time consuming.
Do you know how much that would have been for the rehab?
$12,500 for the one test window, so if you multiply it by 33 windows, and
It's-
that was for an average sized window, it wasn't for the tall ones, it was a small window, so considerably more. Which had, here.
112,500.
And that's for a small one.
Yeah, and that's
33
without,
small windows.
and that's without labor and without engineering tacked on top of it.
Yeah. But bear in mind, the spending resolution that is on the agenda tonight is three items. There's 300,000 for the windows, there's 35,000 for a ramp at Fire Station 2, those in the building improvement, and also building improvements for 50,000. It actually was initiated by Public Works because we had overhead door issues in our building, and the building improvements is something that we typically put in to try to keep our building up. And we have our north, south, and east doors are at the end of life expectancy, and that's why that's on there.
Yeah, I'm certainly not advocating for the council to not move forward with approving that, because there are some time-sensitive requests from DPW on that same resolution. But just so the council is aware, there's a more involved discussion involving the DASNY grant and the windows that would have to take place in the future before we decide how we're proceeding.
How many windows would you, would be able to be replaced with this 500,000?
300,000?
Well, so
The
you're
grant
saying
is
that
300,000.
300,000, about half, depending on the brakes.
So even if with the 500,000, that's not gonna make it to a full replacement, is it?
No, the 562, that's the current quote to replace all the windows with replicas, not rehabilitation. And that's labor, that's materials, that's engineering costs, project management, everything all in. Of course, that quote at this point is 6 months old, and we received it prior to the pandemic, and it's anybody's guess how that pricing has been affected by what's happening, so. The next item on the agenda has to do with the proposed establishment of a new local development corporation for the city. And I passed out a brief memorandum that I put together today, and just outlines some of the discussions and research that my office has done over the past 2 months, because I know that was something that the council was considering back in, I think it was May, maybe June. It was set aside for a while, but we did continue to look into the background so the council would have as much information as possible when it came time to make a decision. There's some feedback from economic development professionals that we had conversations with in Saratoga, and also just a brief summary of some of the additional research that we've conducted. At the very end of that memo, and this mirrors some of the recommendations from the professionals at the Saratoga EDC, they recommended that before the city moves forward with establishing a separate LDC, it would be advisable to have a conversation with Clinton County, who has 2 existing LDCs that operate under the auspices of the CCIDA, to see if there is any way that an arrangement could be crafted that would serve the city's goals, while at the same time not burdening the city with an organization that comes with considerable reporting requirements. I've had very conceptual discussions with the director of the Clinton County IDA about this. There does appear to be some willingness to discuss moving forward under that type of agreement, but of course, before I had any type of detailed discussions, I would want sanction from the mayor and the council. And of course, if those discussions don't pan out or cannot reach a place where the city feels that its input would be adequately incorporated into the goals and objectives of the county's LDC, then we can certainly move forward with a separate organization for the city. But I think it's worth having the discussion beforehand. And the final CDO agenda has to do with an amended finding statement to the GEIS that the council last approved in February of 2020. Now, this was undertaken at the advice of the many attorneys involved in the process. It was put together by the same company who conducted the original GEIS process, Jays and Companies. It analyzed how the recent site plan changes that prime companies instituted to the project on Durkee Street, how that affected various conclusions included in the council's previously adopted statement of findings from February. Now, those conclusions specifically, and we only addressed the changes, we certainly felt no need to revisit everything else because nothing else has changed, but it revisited the number of residential units being reduced and the number of square feet of commercial space being increased, the effect that those have on the fiscal impact that was previously calculated, and the pilot, and actually works out better for the city on both ends. It is a less significant net negative fiscal impact on the city on an annual basis, and the city receives additional money in the form of the pilot than we did under the previous iteration of the mixed-use development. It also addresses traffic concerns. The original DLMUD, and that's Durkee Lot Mixed-Use Development, the study found that at most we would be looking at an increase in wait times at downtown intersections of 5 seconds. Now it calculates the max increase of 11 seconds. For parking, because of the increase in commercial space, there are some additional parking demands on the site, but of course based on the city's antiquated off-street parking requirements and the studies that the Community Development Office have done of the existing demand in the Special Assessment District, there is far more than enough vacant parking to accommodate any changes to parking needs that were brought about by these site plan changes. Aside from that, there's some other minor analyses of other factors, but if the council had any specific questions on the GEIS, I'd be happy to answer.
Matt,
Yes.
you talked about the impact on the city as a tax jurisdiction. What will impacts be for the city school district and the county? Because
What are the pilot impacts on the school district and county?
I don't believe those were evaluated as part of the finding statement. But as I said, the city's impacts are less onerous than they were under the previous iteration.
Did Prime pay for the study, the additional study?
No, this is on the city.
How much was it?
Between the updated traffic and parking analyses and the updated fiscal impacts, the quote was roughly $8,000. And then there is Chazen's time on top of that for compiling and reviewing the final document. I haven't received their final invoice yet, but I can let the council know what that tab comes to.
Yeah, we'll say that was a substantial read.
Yeah.
Took a while to get through that.
Yep. Any other questions?
And that was just an addition, an addendum. to
Yeah,
the
it's,
original GIS. It it was never intended to cover everything.
no, it was only intended to cover the changes, so that's what's been included. And of course, it's not a new statement of findings, it's simply an amendment to the existing statement of findings.
Thanks for that.
Yep, thank you.
Are there any other questions from for the department representatives at this time? Elizabeth? Okay, if not, would entertain a motion to move the agenda items.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Mayor Reed?
Yes?
Okay, at this time, Elizabeth, you have somebody lined up that wanted to speak?
Yes, I asked asked Mark Hamilton to come,
Mark,
and I think it's also a good idea because I see that somebody resubmitted that PHA officer contract for us to look at as a document. And it's still something on the table, so I thought it would be good to get directly from Mark what the officer does.
Okay, very good, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councilor Gibbs. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to you all. My name is Mark Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of the Plattsburgh Housing Authority. And as Councilor Gibbs mentioned, I'm going to just kind of go through the value that we receive from the housing officer and give you a little bit of a better understanding of what he does for us at the Housing Authority. Before I do that, and I will be quick, I promise, but before I do that, I just want to give you a little bit of an idea of what we do at the Housing Authority or the members of the community that we serve. We have nearly 1,400 program participants, and those are spread across 3 major programs. We have a public housing program where we have 601 apartments in about just under 80 buildings. We have 191 housing choice vouchers, and those are subsidies that we provide for the participants to reside in apartments that we don't own. They are market rate apartments, and we just subsidize that rent. And then we have 15 HUD-VASH vouchers, and those are vouchers that are specific to homeless veterans. And we work with the Albany Stratton VA to administer those vouchers. The average annual income of the households in our public housing development, the 601 apartments, which includes 220 senior designated units, is just over $15,000 a year. And based on the average household size, that average household income is about $2,000 under the federal poverty threshold. And those numbers get more distressing when you look at the Housing Choice Voucher Program. The average household income is about $13,000, so it is closer to $4,000 below the poverty threshold. So we work with and provide an essential service, housing, for some of the city's most challenged families. We currently have a wait list in total of about 380 families. So the need continues to grow. Related specifically to the housing officer, there are several things that he does for us that we find incredibly valuable. And I would start with helping us to comply with the federal regulations. We're, as a federally subsidized organization, we have requirements in terms of eligibility and in terms of lease requirements. And some of those, many of those, deal with criminal backgrounds, drug use, and things of that nature. So we rely on the liaison from the Plattsburgh City Police Department to work with us through the application phase. Every application that we receive goes through a check, and if there's a flag, if there's a red flag, there's some background that an individual in that household has, they're required to get fingerprinted. We submit that to a database run by the FBI. We then get those reports back, and he assists us in understanding and reading those reports. He'll often interview the families dependent on what that background is. That's really important, again, for us to comply, but it also creates a better sense of safety for the residents that we do have in our housing programs. Another component to what he does, and we find this to be incredibly valuable, very little of what the housing officer does, and I say he because it's currently Officer Rotella, but it could be any city police officer that was so designated. One of the really important things that we receive is the ability to work with somebody specifically designed to conflict resolute and work through mediation. So we can deal with issues, whether they're neighbor issues, noise complaints, welfare checks, a laundry list of things where we don't end up with criminal behavior. where we don't end up where things escalate to a point that the police are called because of a crime. So we work with our families and the officer. In fact, this afternoon, we met with 4 separate households in different issues and brought the officer in so that we could have dialogue all together. We find that to be incredibly valuable, and it's something that I believe helps us and helps the residents, the families that we work with, come to a better conclusion on a lot of the incidents that take place. It also provides for a better understanding of a situation. So because he works with us through the application phase and then all the way through various complaints and non-criminal issues, he has an understanding of families. He has an understanding of whether it's previous issues. So when he arrives to a scene or we call him to assist us, he's coming with that knowledge, and we find that to be very valuable as well. Whether it could result in a CPS call, and there's more history there that he can provide. So that's really important to us. We have a youth center that is specifically designed to provide programming for our youth. It's called the Ted K Center. It's an incredibly valuable service that we provide to the families free of charge. And he engages with that youth center on a continual basis, whether it's going with them on field trips, participating in various events and programs, family fun days. Unfortunately, this year, some of those things haven't been able to take place. But in a typical year, he'll volunteer his time to help us with Toys for Tots, all sorts of programs. And he can engage with the youth, build a positive relationship, change their perception of the police and of the Housing Authority Administration. So that's really important as well. And then there is crime. I mean, I think there's crime throughout the city. It's no different in the Housing Authority. The vast majority, I would say confidently, 85 to 90% of what he does is preventative in nature, where he works with us through situations to avoid those criminal events from taking place. But there is opportunity where crime does take place, and having him, again, with the full history of the situation and the knowledge, it helps to alleviate some of those situations when they do occur. So in general, those are the tenets of what we receive from the housing officer. I don't know if there's questions, if there's anything that anybody would like to know in more detail.
Mark, one of the things that you shared with me when we spoke on the phone was the way in which he also assists in the elderly community.
Yes.
Maybe council would like to hear more about that.
Sure. I appreciate that, Councilor Gibbs. So we have 220 senior designated units. He works often with our senior population or senior coordinator when we have, whether they're welfare checks. He participates on a local task force for senior abuse, fraud and abuse, and so he's able to assist us if we have family members who are acting inappropriately with senior's bank account or even with the senior themselves. So throughout the last several years, we've had several incidents where he's been able to assist us in assisting the resident to get the help necessary or to stop the illegal activity from taking place.
Anyone
Thanks,
have
Mark.
any questions, Mark?
Well, thanks, Mark, for
Sure.
coming here, and I'm very supportive of what you're talking about with the public housing officer. I'd like to just take advantage of you while you're here. That you heard a brief conversation about a local development corporation that the city is considering tonight about creating. And I wonder if you could speak a little about the nonprofit that, and I don't know if it's an LDC, it's the same framework or whatever, but you have a nonprofit board that's a subset of the Public Housing Authority that is doing development, low-income housing development, buying like the Champlain
Correct.
Bailey
Yep.
Avenue house, a dilapidated house, and refixing that house and returning to a really well well-designed, well-operated home for people to, 3 apartments for people to live in.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm wondering, as we're considering just talking about this tonight, a couple of things that came up that, you know, is this what's the administrative burden on you and the Public Housing Authority to have this arm out here?
Sure. So several years ago, we created a not-for-profit called Plattsburgh Community Housing. And we use that not-for-profit as a vehicle to develop additional housing and meet the various needs of the community. In a lot of instances, the housing authority itself as an organization is unable to do some of those things. It doesn't have the flexibility. So we recently, within the last several years, created Plattsburgh Community Housing. If any of you have been, it's actually in the town, but it's right along the line on New York Road. There's a development going up next door to the Denimora Federal Credit Union, and that is Atlas Heights, which is a 40-unit affordable housing development that the PCH, or Plattsburgh Community Housing, is developing. We have another project that we have in place right now is on the corner of Bailey Avenue and Champlain Street, and if you're familiar with that area, you'll know that there's been a triplex there for close to half a decade that's been vacated and was purchased by somebody from out of town several years ago. They never did anything with it. It continued to fall into further disarray. We were able to purchase that. We are investing a significant amount of money into that building, where we will get that building back up to a much higher standard. It will help raise that entire neighborhood. It will provide 3 additional housing units for the city of Plattsburgh. We intend at this point to partner with the PHA to use the voucher program to do that. So yes, we have this development entity that we've been able to cultivate, and we are continually investigating a variety of programs. It is a separate board from the Housing Authority, so it is a separate entity as it's designed. It's called an affiliate organization, has a separate tax ID number. And we have even had discussions with the city about potentially taking on some of the tax delinquent properties, again, investing in those and creating a home ownership program for income eligible families using that vehicle. So I think there's probably...
How is it staffed?
So right now there's...
30 seconds before our hearing, so.
We have a public hearing.
Sorry.
For thoughts, so I'm sorry to cut it.
No, that's fine. I'd be happy to come back sometime.
You coming here and...
Sure. I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Mark, appreciate it.
Thank you.
This time I entertain a motion to adjourn our committee meeting and...
I'll make a motion.
Okay, I'll second.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Mayor Reed?
Yes. And right on time, we can begin our public hearing for tonight, 5 p.m. for the Common Council. City of Plattsburgh is holding a public hearing to hear public comments on a proposed local law P3, a local law renaming, amending, and replacing in its entirety section 144-18 rental permits to chapter 144 building code administration and enforcement to the city code of the city of Plattsburgh. And I believe that YouTube comments are also open at this time too. Are there any members of the public like to please come and address the council on this amendment to an existing local law?
Did you sign in?
Want to sign in here,
Pen there? Sorry.
Denise?
No, I have a sign-in sheet over there.
Okay.
Just in here.
You can use it.
I know who you are.
Denise Nephew from Smith Street. I'm in agreement of this local law, but it's only a start. I do believe we need a little bit more teeth and ask that the purpose of this, the second line, or units within a duplex to more than 4 unrelated individuals, maybe say 2. If you can't do it tonight, please think about this. Again, this is a start, but it doesn't help the R2 neighborhoods that have been influxed with the rentals. Houses that used to be single-family homes are now rentals. Again,
Sit, please, sorry.
this isn't about the good landlords. It's about the landlords that aren't keeping up their properties. We know what it's about, and unfortunately, this really has to go. It's a start, but again, I know on my street, there's at least 3 houses that used to be single-family homes, or just not even a duplex or a 2-family, and this might not relate to this if it says for unrelated individuals. I don't know. Again, it's a start. Please go ahead and approve this. However, I do think it needs a little bit more teeth. And related to this is the complaint reports. There hasn't been a complaint report on any agenda since April 30th. So how are you going to see where the complaints are to these rental properties if you don't get a complaint report? Just wondering where your complaint reports are from the building inspector's office. And since I used to provide them, it doesn't take but a couple of minutes to provide them. Again, you can't see who the complaints are unless you get the report from that office. Again, thank you, this is a start, but please think about putting more teeth in this law, because it's the R2 areas that are inundated. This is the we're losing the single-family home. We need to bring more single-family homes back to our R2 districts. And I'm not saying the people are bad. No, they're not, and neither are the landlords. But if we put more teeth in this, then maybe we won't have the Public Works Department picking up the garbage that hasn't been picked up in months. Having the building inspector follow up on the lawns not being mowed or the garbage not being picked up. Thank you.
Any other individuals like to please come forward? And just for the sake of the public, this is actually a modification of an existing law based on some conversations between the infrastructure committee and some of the interested parties that was affected by the local law. Any further discussion?
Terry,
Please
you have
come
to
forward.
sit down because we have to keep the 6 feet.
Oh, I'm gonna leave.
That's okay, there's a seat up here. We just have to keep our 6 feet.
Hello. Are we limited on time?
We are 5
Okay,
minutes.
5 minutes? I won't take 5 minutes. My name is John Ducharme, and I am an attorney from Clifton Park, New York, with the law firm Ducharme and Clark, and I represent the concerned owners of Plattsburgh LLC, which is a coalition of landowners that own over 2,500 residential apartment units in the city of Plattsburgh. I've been involved in the negotiations of this modification with the mayor, with Dean Schnellner, the Corporation Council. As a result of our negotiations, we've agreed to the provisions of local law P3 of 2002, which are now before you for your consideration. The managing members of my clients have submitted a letter, or will be submitting a letter through Neil Fassett, which expressed their support for the revised modifications. Some of you may recall this issue was first raised back in December of 2019. My clients had expressed some concerns regarding the local law. It was a relatively contentious public hearing, but the proposed law was adopted. And to Mayor Reed's credit and to Corporation Counsel Schneller's credit, they agreed to meet with representatives of my clients, and we began the negotiations to address some of my clients' concerns. While I've always respected Mayor Reed and Corporation Counsel Schneller, I must confess that my respect for them grew during our negotiations. While I don't always agree with them, and I find them to be fierce advocates for what they believe is the best interest of the city and its residents, And I firmly believe that the proposed amendments before you today represent reasonable compromise, which accomplishes the city's goals, while at the same time addresses my client's major concerns. And on behalf of my client and its members, who again own over 250 or 2,500 rental units in the city, I respectfully request that you adopt the revised law. Thank you.
Any other members of the public like to please come forward?
Good evening, everybody. I don't want to be repetitive. I'm Neil Fassett, 176 US Oval. I wanted to thank the council. I want to thank Mayor Reed, Councilor Schneller, Attorney Schneller, Jeff Moore, and Mike Kelly for giving us a seat at the table, talking to us, and kind of working through the issues within this registry law to the point where our belief is that we've got a piece of legislation now that is fair. You know, it's fair to the city, fair to landlords and tenants alike, and I think it's going to serve the city well. I wanted to just talk a second and plea with you on the issue of fees. The pandemic has been really tough on our tenants and on us. I was chatting with Terry Miron earlier, and you know, we're both right in that 10% range of delinquencies, and you know, obviously we don't want to evict anybody. It's tough to pay the bills when you've got people not paying rent. So we would just ask for your consideration of perhaps moving back the expense part. We have no problem with registering the apartments. The vast majority, all of our members, I think, want to be code compliant, but we would ask for your consideration of that and your consideration of if you adopt these modifications, that we will together try to work on the lowest expenses we can possibly have for this registry law, because as you know, what happens is landlords, business people in general, when the extra fees, taxes, whatever are added on, you attempt to pass them through to the tenants, customers, and we really prefer not to do that. So I appreciate your consideration, and again, I want to thank those of you that have been involved with the many hours that we've put in to try to find common ground on this. Thank you.
Any other members like to please come forward? I believe there's a comment on YouTube from mayoral candidate Rosenquist. Do you want to read it out?
Yes, from Christopher Rosenquist. I'd like to thank the council and the members of the Landlord-Tenant Board who came to an amicable compromise to this law. Please pass this and then look for ways to revise and enhance in the future.
Hello, Terry Miron. I just want to say make one what I think is an important point. We're now a permanent organization, the Organization of Landlords, and we want to offer you our expertise in that industry to be a cooperative entity with you to resolve problems. I think, being so familiar and having a lot of experience in it can be a good resource for you. So again, and thank you for cooperating on the resolution of this issue. Thank you very much.
And I might add that during the conversations between the landlords and the council committee, that sense of cooperation and trying to be on the same page and improving housing in the city, I think it really did come out, so I have no doubt of your sentiment.
I'd just like to add my thanks to the committee, but a couple of requests for the organization as well. There are two other items that are current in the city. One is the beginning of a comprehensive plan that's going to update zoning. And I think it'd be extremely helpful, and we can communicate that to Saratoga Associates to schedule some kind of time to get together with your group and go over any issues that you have with the zoning codes in the city of Plattsburgh that would facilitate maintaining the character of the neighborhoods, but also eliminating any barriers to being able to do business in the city. And I think that would be extremely helpful to the city as we begin to redevelop the zoning code in the city. The second one is the Public Safety Committee that Elizabeth and I are on we are going to be bringing forth a local law around fire alarms. Not just fire, but burglary and fire, but false alarms. Right now, we have, the police department, for example, has 307 alarms that they respond to. 300 of them are false alarms. The fire department had about 274 false alarms that they responded to last year. So we're trying to develop an ordinance or law, local law, I call it an ordinance, I guess it's a local law. But I would love to have at some point, but with Elizabeth, to convene some kind of a public meeting with you again, as I suspect most of you have some kind of fire alarm system in your buildings. You're working with different alarm companies. It would be extremely helpful to look at this before we even bring it to the council. So,
Thank you.
Okay.
If there's no other public comments, I'd like to declare this public hearing over and begin our common council meeting for tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Excuse me, ma'am. Sorry, you need to sit. Right. Okay, here. Mayor Reed,
Present.
Councilor Barbell,
Here.
Councilor Kelly,
Here.
Councilor Gibbs,
Here.
Councilor Brody,
Here.
Councilor McFarland, Councilor Moore,
Here,
I know we have a very full agenda tonight with some very important issues, but I do really lament, some of the council has commented this weekend, one more visible sign of hate in our community, swastikas being drawn. It's just really quite a shame that this is really deteriorating locally. This level has been such an acceleration of that sort of vandalism and hate, and a lot of people capitalizing on that hate and anarchy as well. What a time we're all dealing with, but obviously this common council absolutely abhors any lack of tolerance and demeaning of any group in our city. And I'm appreciative of our DPW that can try to remedy these real black marks on the face of our community whenever and wherever they occur. So I apologize to the entire community for the behavior of some who always modeled this as a very tolerant and embracing and diverse community, and certainly the actions of a few that would go above or beyond the law to prove their point is really shameful. Please continue.
Resolved that the minutes of the regular meeting of the Common Council held on September 3rd, 2020 are approved and placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office.
Moved by Councilor Barbell and second by Councilor Brody. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed.
Resolved that the payrolls of the various departments of the city of Plattsburgh for the week ending September 9th, 2020 in the amount of $461,837.53 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby empowered and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Moore and second by Councilor Kelly. Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. You've got your various reports, and I think we should be including one more report next week from the status on complaints. The councilor, as Ms. Nephew had outlined. Do we have any individual department chair committee reports, beginning with city governance strategy and city operations? Councilor Barbell.
We have one item on the agenda tonight that is, I think, part of city operations, and that's looking at changes in the payments on utility bills, and we'll take that up when the resolution comes on, and no other items.
City infrastructure, Councilor Moore.
we just had our committee meeting, and it's on the live stream if you listen.
Finance and budget, Councilor Kelly.
Our meeting is next week, and we will prepare an agenda for that meeting.
Very much. Public safety, Councilor Gibbs.
Councilor Barbell and I continue to meet. We are scheduled to meet tomorrow. Ira, are we still 5:30?
Are you still meeting at some
4:30 Friday, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we continue to meet and discuss budget, and we will have our regular scheduled meeting in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Can anybody speak for the public library or MLD on behalf of Councilor McFarland? Seeing none, resolved, the reports of the list are hereby ordered received, and any written reports are placed on file among the public records of the city clerk's office. Moved by Councilor Kelly and seconded by Councilor Barbell. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. No correspondence to the recommendations from boards at this time. Please continue.
Resolved that the bills levied by the common council for the week ending September 11, 2020, in the amount of $1,449,072.89 are authorized and allowed, and the mayor and the city clerk are hereby authorized and directed to sign warrants drawn on the city chamberlain for the payment thereof.
Moved by Councilor Moore and seconded by Councilor Kelly. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. At this time, are there any members of the public who'd like to please come and address the council on items that are on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, please continue.
Motion to remove item 7A from the table.
Do you have a motion? This is specifying the Plattsburgh Housing Authority contracts. Councilor Barbell, is there a second to remove from table? Councilor Brody, all in favor of removing from the table?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Discussion on the item itself.
Just one question. Does the housing authority pay property?
Last week about changes to this contract, and I asked to see the updated contract, but I saw that the old contract was sent back to us by email. So are we moving forward with the existing contract as is, or is there some kind of altered contract that's been created with Chief Ritter for the council to look at? Can we get a status on that?
Chief Ritter, do you have an update on that? Or Dean, do you have an update on that?
I personally have not modified that prior contract.
I haven't either. I'm still trying to evaluate what the council desires.
Last week I proposed, if you recall, I believe there was a meeting of the minds between Plattsburgh Housing Authority and yourself on providing a menu of services rather than a dedicated officer for the fixed sum. And I think there was an agreement on that, and you were working to rough out what those details were. I'd put on the table as a matter of passing that in principle, subject to ratification of the final contract, if I recall last week.
That was an attempt, but it was never.
Right.
There was a proposed amendment language to authorize myself to draft that contract along those basic tenets, but that was not approved by this council. So currently, just as a matter of procedure, what's on the table right now is the old contract, the former contract.
So if something new is in the works, then this should probably just be defeated.
And wait
Until-
till it actually, yeah, it's probably best to rather have it tabled from week to week to week, yeah.
And then if, when that new contract is created, I would like to see it before it goes on the agenda. So I would suggest that we defeat this because it doesn't sound like we're going to approve this as it stands. And like you said, it doesn't seem like a good idea to keep tabling it. I think we need to make a decision, but that's my opinion.
Any other thoughts?
Does the housing authority pay property taxes?
No.
Pay pilot.
Now, when they expand into other pieces of property, do those properties pay property taxes?
They pay a pilot based on their revenues and their operational expenses. We just received that recently. The city shares in about 86,000 out of 190,000 we just received on Friday. The school district gets the balance, 104,000. It's an annual payment. Last year was about 178,000.
Based upon their income?
Yep.
What's the percentage?
Percentage of what?
What they make? Oh, what they give us. In other words, if they're a nonprofit.
I will send you a copy of the report. It's a very complicated calculation, but it's 190,000 in the revenue this year, which we share 86, 104, city to school. Last year was 178,000 roughly. So it varies from year to year, but we also have to share it with the school.
And if they expand to other housing units, those little properties will not be on the tax rolls either?
That would be right.
Prime example why we need to have special service fees.
I have a lot of questions about this, but I think I'd prefer to wait until the resolution comes up again. If it's the council's feeling we're going to defeat this tonight. But I do have several questions.
Can I ask if you feel we're moving in the right direction in trying to complete a negotiation for a menu of services rather than a dedicated officer? Is that approximately the approach you would like to see in a contract?
Well, I just remember there was this, a salary for the current person of $68,000 a year, and the housing authority is paying $31,000 for what is essentially a full-time person in their premises. And I'd like to see us, you know, provide the service that they can pay for, that they're willing to pay for. So that would say to me that that's roughly half the time of a paid officer to be at the housing authority providing the services that Mark Hamilton described to us tonight.
And I think that's roughly true, but it wouldn't necessarily be half the time of one officer. For instance, they need fingerprinting to vet people as tenants, for instance, and that doesn't need to be done by necessarily that one officer. They're using police services that would then add up to $31,000 rather than $31,000 worth of one person's time. So it'd be more distributed across the police force rather than through one dedicated individual. So if that's the approach, which sounds like it's fine with the police and sounds like it's fine roughly with PHA.
Not necessarily. I mean, Mark Hamilton spoke about the unique.
Could Chief Ritter come to the microphone?
Oh, come on.
Thank you.
Mark Hamilton spoke about the uniqueness of that position and why having a dedicated officer is important for several reasons. The continuity of dealing with mediation with families in public housing. Speaking about just fingerprinting is a sliver of what that officer does. So it's not completely accurate what you're saying. I just wanted to clarify that. But taking a multi-page document that addresses things that we don't even have the staffing for in a lot of the reports that you requested, Councilor Gibbs, and in meetings that are held, those just, if we're going to revise it, we need to really be smart about what we're offering up in terms of all of these different things that we can't even provide, absent from the dedicated officer that conducts all the services that Mark Hamilton spoke about. So that's what I'm trying to create, and I have met with Mark Hamilton to find out what the valuable services they receive are, and he articulated those to you tonight. So,
thank you.
Sounds like a full-time job.
Your words, not mine.
Have we asked for a raise? Ask the housing authority for more money, meet us halfway?
No, so this is where the discussion with Mark Hamilton is that the services that the housing authority requires can more than be accommodated by the money that they are providing to offset the salary. It just won't be a 40-hour-a-week set of services.
See, I am very much in support of getting a connection between, or maintaining a connection between Officer Motella and the Public Housing Authority.
And this is the consistency that he talked about, yes.
And, I could see, Officer Motella being part of the patrol functions of the city with a special focus on patrolling and responding to certain issues in the housing authority and keeping some connection to the work that he's doing, whether it's fraud with an elderly individual or whether it's connecting with some of the youth in the housing authority that may be running into some difficulties. And
what you just spoke about there is the origin of this housing officer as a position, was to dedicate an officer to the outreach of the children and youth within the housing authority at the Ted K Center.
But there are criminal you know, there are criminal offenses. Although he did acknowledge that that was a smaller portion. But having somebody there that people begin to know enables them to share information with the police department that you would never get.
That's correct.
And so I think if you're looking at it within the broad aspect of a patrol officer who has a specialty, and maybe not 100% of his time goes over there, and he may be doing other things on patrol or with the police department, I think we could come up with something on there where, you know, they're getting their money's worth for the 30-some thousand, I don't know exact figure.
Sure. But it won't be a 40-hour
But it isn't going to be,
dedicated.
he's not going to be there 100% of the time.
That is in essence what a future contract would look
Yeah.
like. Specifying services within what that actually gives them.
And I would really like to see that happen.
So, can I interject?
Please.
So one of the things that Mark had explained to me when I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago is the criminal activity that we had spoken about, you know, admittedly not excessive in any way, but that the PHA rules have a zero tolerance policy, and because of HUD. So the nature of what, this is the way he explained it to me, the nature of what he, what the PHA officer does is a little different in the fact that, or the way PHA handles it, I guess is the way I should explain it. It's different because of that zero tolerance policy. So if, you know, you've got a tenant in a rental unit in the city, and that person commits a crime, it's not handled the same way as a person in the PHA. And so that kind of necessitates an officer to be involved too. I don't know if I'm explaining it very clearly, but I just thought I'd interject that.
You know, my big problem with the whole thing, and I don't like to talk about it because maybe kind of emotional for some people, is we don't put police cars on Trafalgar Drive and say, okay, we're going to walk around from door to door on Trafalgar Drive. We're going to ask the people there who live there, how's everything going? You know, or are you having any issues? Do we need to get you people together to solve your problems? But for some reason in a housing authority where poor people live, we seem to think that's an okay thing to do, interfere in their lives. And maybe they do need mediation. But I wonder if they need police officers knocking on their doors and wandering around their neighborhoods any more than any other neighborhood would have police officers wandering around in their neighborhoods. So that's a big issue. I'm trying to get it straight in my head.
That's an excellent observation. I think that Mark Hamilton would have been better addressed with speaking on behalf of the housing authority on that, though.
So that'll be my issue, even if this does come back on the agenda at another time, is why is this okay that we police poor people this way, but we don't police more well-to-do people this way?
I don't think that that's what anyone should gather from what Mark Hamilton said here, because he talked about it in terms of what the housing officer does, and that is not the focus of his job is not arresting people and over-policing them. Much of his function is community policing and outreach. So I really don't take what he said as discriminatory in any nature.
Okay, I just wonder, you know, I gotta have an answer, you know, why don't we, and I guess we don't have HUD in our more well-to-do neighborhoods, so HUD seems to work with low-income housing, so, but they mandate that some sort of police presence be in all of the HUD-funded facilities. Is that correct?
I don't know what you mean by mandate some sort of police.
In order to receive money from the housing and urban development, you have to have some sort of policing going on.
That's not the case.
Okay, there's no law that says that.
I'm not a lawyer and I'm not aware of that. I'm also not the housing authority director either.
And so then I wonder, well, you know, if there's no mandate from their funding source to have policing in their facility, why don't you just call the cops like everybody else when they have problems? That would seem to solve the problems as far as I'm concerned. If they need some sort of community outreach person, you know, I think we use the same argument with the school officers. Why does it have to be an armed officer?
Well, as Mark Hamilton said, to comply with federal guidelines for the background investigation, that's why utilizing a law enforcement officer is recommended.
Okay.
That's the main
It's
function of
recommended.
what that officer does. So I don't know why the focus is on policing poor people.
Would you say that again, what you just said, Eli? Or Levi, I'm sorry. Would you say that again, what you just said? I'm sorry, I didn't catch it. And if you can't remember, I'll have to go home and watch a YouTube video. But I will. Okay. It sounded reasonable.
Can I,
Okay.
can
Well,
I?
I think we're planning to table this here, so maybe we shouldn't have too much more substantive discussion on it.
We haven't tabled it yet, so.
Yeah.
Whenever.
Well, let me ask you all the sense, are you wishing to table it tonight, or are you wishing to vote on it substantively tonight? Or defeat it tonight? Because if you're wishing to pass it, let's try to get to that point, but if you're wishing to defeat it so you can have a contract in front of you, I think you're gonna be discussing all these things at another meeting.
Right, I think Elizabeth is correct. There ought to be some delineation in the contract before we pass this. So if you don't want to table it, then we need to move to, you know, dismiss or
Like a purchase
vote it
order,
down,
yeah.
and then move to contact Mark and the chief to bring it back with the contract. And, you know, there are a number of us prepared to kind of support this.
So I'd like to make a suggestion that we voted down. Our public safety meeting is in 2 weeks. That should be enough time for Chief Ritter, Mark, Mr. Hamilton, the mayor, Public Safety Committee should really get some information before it comes up, and then maybe just put it on the agenda in 2 weeks, either the same contract that we have now, because it's a decision that we want a full-time dedicated officer there, or a revised contract that indicates this menu as Mayor Reed had discussed. But I think we should take some action to either, I think we should defeat it, and then either same thing is brought up in 2 weeks in our public safety meeting, or a new one is brought up in our public safety meeting. And maybe if the council would like, you can ask Mark Hamilton to come back. So that would be my suggestion.
So if there's nobody here right now that would like to advocate to pass this at this time, could I ask for a consensus and a roll call to defeat it?
Yes.
Roll call?
Council Barbell?
Yes.
Just
Or you have to
to
say
be
no.
clear, I mean, yeah, I think the motion was to approve this contract, so.
So they're voting no.
So we're voting
No,
no?
you're defeating it.
Okay.
Council
Start
Barbell?
over. No.
Council Kelly?
No.
Council Gibbs?
No.
Council Brody?
No.
Council Moore?
No,
So that is defeated. Adopting amended finding statement for downtown area improvement project. Whereas the city of Plattsburgh is undertaking a series of revitalization efforts that are collectively described as the Downtown Area Improvement Project, DAIP. And whereas the Plattsburgh Common Council determined that the DAIP are collectively a type 1 action pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA. It identified the potential involved agencies under SECRA and was designated as SECRA lead agency with consent of the involved agencies. And whereas the Common Council duly conducted comprehensive review of the DAIP through preparation of a generic environmental impact statement, GEIS, pursuant to SECRA and Section 617.10 of the implementing regulations set forth at Title VI of the New York Compilation of Codes, Rules and Regulations, NYCRR. And whereas the Common Council adopted a SECRA statement of findings, including the specific findings and certifications required by the SECRA regulations at 6 NYCRR Section 617.11D on February 20th, 2020, and authorized and directed the city clerk to file a statement of findings as required by SECRA. And whereas the subsequent to the Common Council's adoption of the statement of findings, detailed plans for one component of the DAIP, the Durkee Lot Mixed Use Development, DLMUD, were presented at the City of Plattsburgh Planning Board and the Zoning Board of Appeals seeking required approvals. And whereas in response to feedback from both of these boards, the project sponsor refined and revised the DLMUD plans, and whereas the proposed changes were deemed to be sufficiently substantial by the Common Council prior preparation of an amendment to the Statement of Findings, and whereas an amendment to the Statement of Findings has been prepared to reflect analysis of these modifications, and whereas the proposed amendment has been reviewed by the Common Council, now therefore be it resolved as follows. The Common Council hereby adopts the amendment to the Statement of Findings and ratifies and affirms the specific findings and certifications required by the secret regulations at 6 NYCRR Section 617.11D. The city clerk is authorized and directed to file the amendment to the Statement of Findings as required by the secret regulations.
Moved by Councilor Marvell, second by Councilor Kelly. Discussion?
Mayor, just one brief thing. And this was, Councilor Gibbs, you had asked previously whether the amended finding statement analyzes the changes to the pilot agreement as it relates to the school district. I misspoke earlier on page 20 of the document. It does include an analysis of that effect. Basically, there's a slight reduction in the anticipated number of new students based on the reduced size of the residential units. The corresponding increase in annual state aid more than makes up for the new expenses to the district. And based on the pilot beginning in year 8, the district will see a net positive fiscal impact of over $73,000. So just clarifying that.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Barbell?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Brody?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the Common Council agrees to and authorizes entering into an agreement with HydroSource Associates based on their August 17, 2020 proposal at an estimated amount of $125,000.
Moved by Councilor Moore and second by Councilor Brody. Discussion? Councilor Moore, do you just want to, I know you talked about it in your pre-committee meeting, just want to let the public who's here now know what this is referring to?
Well, this is in regards to the test wells, continuing on with those to provide a secondary source of water in case of a problem with the dam. And hopefully this will be able to completely replace the dam. Was a problem to arise with the dam. So as it stands now, there's substantial repairs need to be made to make it earthquake proof. So that's something that the state requires. So this is pretty necessary to continue on with these test wells, get them online.
And I think this shows real creativity on the part of Engineer Ruff on moving this forward. It's a very clever idea to increase water resiliency for the city of Plattsburgh and lower the cost for taxpayers. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Barbell?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Brody?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Authorizing the formation of the Plattsburgh Progress Local Development Corporation.
Mayor, I'd like to waive the reading and move the resolution.
Moved by Councilor Barbell, second by Councilor Kelly. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Discussion on the item itself?
I thank you, Matt, for your comments on the background that you gathered on the LDC. I am somewhat reluctant to delay moving forward with an LDC in the city in the hopes that somehow we would negotiate an agreement with county government to share as part of their LDC. For the public, the reasons why we think this is important. If you were here a couple of weeks ago, you heard Windward Corporation coming in, expressing interest in exploring the development of a hotel and down by the marina. And his comments were, I wish you had an LDC so that we could begin to have specific conversations that would help us come to an agreement on what our cost is going to be, what your cost is going to be, without laying it all out in public. With an LDC, that would provide the opportunity for the council to have an organization begin to work on economic development, housing development in the city. in carrying on and soliciting developers to come up with ideas for property that are sitting vacant at this point that could be put back on the tax rolls. And so with that, I am very much and would encourage the council to move forward and approve this LDC.
Ira, Ira,
Yes.
I have a few questions. I see that there are a list of 3 directors on this resolution. Who are Tim McCormick and Jerry Rosenbaum?
Jerry Rosenbaum's an appraisal, the independent appraiser, been doing it for 30 to 40 years. Tim McCormick was an accountant, now he's a private investor, I believe.
Who I believe was helped form or was the president of the town of Plattsburgh LDC at one
Yes.
time as well, so has some experience in this matter.
I guess I'm a little confused about what happens next after this is passed. Does this mean it's absolutely formed? Does it need to be funded? Does there need to be a panel? I'm not clear.
I believe that this will allow us to move forward and create an LDC for the city of Plattsburgh. The steps that you're talking about will be subsequent steps in terms of what is our budget availability right now to begin to operate this LDC and perform the functions that we'd like to see it happening. That's a second step in the process, but we can't do that before we form an LDC.
So this is largely a procedural motion which authorizes the submission of the filing of the certificate of incorporation and names the initial directors. There are 3 individuals named, which is the state minimum, but there's a potential under the proposed certificate of incorporation of up to 15 directors. So really this is the starting point in the process to form the group. This is quote unquote the easy step. The hard step is going to be all the work that's required in the future and all those harder decisions that are going to need to be made in the future. This again forms it and then goes from there.
Does anybody know in kind of like a ballpark fashion how much it will cost to fund this?
We could provide some seed money to the corporation, and then it would be up to the corporation after that to fund their own way. In other words, they would take a very small amount of, a small percentage of each and every deal they make. If for example, we contract with the LDC to sell property for us, which is a much more efficient way to do it than using our, internal methods, then they would actually take a small cut of that proceeds and return the rest to the city. So that after an initial funding period, say of a half a year, then they would be expected to make their own way.
What if they can't? What happens to the money that will be dedicated to it?
For example, in the case of the Skyward project, I think it is, that's a $28 million project, or I'm sorry, $35 million project. And, their slice of that could be, a very small amount, but it would be a significant amount of money. A very small percentage, but a significant amount of money.
I wouldn't recommend simply seeding an LDC. I would recommend contracting with the LDC to perform certain functions for the city on a fee-for-service basis. I don't think it's the city's taxpayers' responsibility to be seeding or funding what is essentially private development. We want to create a nice level playing field. We've got a number of developers in the room right now. We'd like to have an avenue for you developers to come to somebody and talk about potentially marketing properties where we just don't have the avenue to do that right now because of the way city has to operate. So, and maybe with the developers in this room, maybe you are getting some ideas tonight to improve the dialogue in these ways. But like our legal counsel said, we can't even engage in any of these discussions until we create the organization, because the city simply is not permitted to do this.
And I'll just add that nothing's free. We create this entity. The next step is figuring out how we get good quality people to run that entity and get seated to get it off the ground. Whether it's a contract with us and them in some way, they're not going to be city employees. They're going to be people that are looking to do development in this city. And that's all, that nobody can tell. I mean, I can't tell you what that's going to cost. That's going to cost some money to the city. But the potential return, I think, could be tremendous for the city.
Well, I just wanted to say I'm 100% behind the LDC idea, but that raised a question, which would that preclude us from utilizing county LDC, or is this lock us into our own?
I don't say legally preclude you, but as a natural consequence of this, then we would tend to want to funnel projects towards this city-specific LDC versus a countywide or regional LDC.
Okay, just want to answer that question.
I'm sure this LDC can actually construct its business as any independent 501c3 corporation could, which meant if they wanted to work with another IDA, et cetera, or a number of developers, et cetera, they'd be perfectly free to do so.
So they could work with another LDC to promote a project. I guess that's what I was actually getting at. Okay, thank you.
And as you know, I've been very excited about some of the development opportunities we have in the city. We're talking about annexing potentially 220 acres of land, which could be brought to market. And you know, the harbor side, I think Mr. Facet's even had some really great ideas on what we could do with the harbor side at some point. Mr. Barbell pointed out we've got 10 acres of land at our old oval that's been sitting there languishing, doing nothing, waterfront, some of the nicest land in the entire city that hasn't been developed at all because we don't have the means to do it. So I would hope that this LDC really leaves the gate quickly and creates some successes that can add, I believe, between 10 and 15% to the property tax base of the city of Plattsburgh and help all our taxpayers out commensurately by sharing that burden that Councillor Brody constantly is working so hard to do. So I think this is very exciting.
Yeah, I'm going to just add one other point also, because you know, I think comments were made on the planning board, the city planning board, that when they heard initially about some discussion about an LDC being formed, that meant we were abolishing the Office of Community Development. And I want to ensure the public we're not abolishing the Office of Community Development. You know, their responsibilities are different than just development of properties, housing, businesses. I mean, without what we need from that Office of Community Development is, you know, the extra focus on developing the strategic plans, the long-range goals for the city, formulating and recommending policies to achieve those goals, and then by balancing kind of the environmental, social, and economic needs of the city. And that's a huge role that I think we haven't been attentive to enough. Where it will become an important component to lay out where this city wants to be 10 years from now, and how do we get there. And I think the work you're doing with Saratoga Associates right now is only a first small step in moving in that direction. That's going to stay with the Office of Community Development. There will be obviously partnerships and conversations and coordination with an LDC to ensure that it fits within the broad strategic plan for the city.
Good summary. Any other comments? Roll call?
Counselor Barbell?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
No.
Counselor Brody?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Adoption of local law P-3 of 2020, a local law renaming, amending, and replacing in its entirety section 144-18 rental permits to chapter 144 Building Code Administration and Enforcement to the City Code of the City of Plattsburgh. This local law shall take effect immediately upon approval by the mayor and filing with the New York Secretary of State, the entire text of which has been distributed to and read by the members of the Common Council, is hereby enacted without the reading thereof, and a copy of said local law is made part of the minutes of this meeting.
Moved by Councillor Moore, second by Councillor Kelly. Discussion.
I just have some paperwork we got to run through initially. So it's a secret short form There may be differing opinions on whether this is a qualifying action that triggers seeker. Because there's differing opinions, I'd rather err on the side of caution and run through this unlisted action. So we've been through this exercise before. Because this is purely a legislative action, we don't need to run through all of the details of the short form EAF, but rather get to skip over to part 2. And it's the questions, we are familiar with the 11 questions, asking whether there is a no or small impact, or conversely a moderate to large impact. So again, as we've done in the past, I'm going to ask the question. We can just hopefully generate a consensus on either option and run through them as efficiently as possible. Fair enough?
Dean,
Yep.
since it's really difficult for me to hear, and I'm not there, I'm going to abstain from the process. Is that okay?
You can just move to
Well,
the
I'm going to move
microphone.
towards the microphone. I'm muffled with my face covering, obviously.
Take your
Is that
face
better?
mask.
Is it better?
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm not there and I don't have, you know, does everybody else have the form in them?
No.
No, none of us do. We're just going to listen to Dean.
Okay, okay.
Okay, so the first question is whether the proposed action will create a material conflict with an adopted land use plan or zoning regulations.
No.
Okay. Will the proposed action result in a change in the use or intensity of the use of land?
No.
Will the proposed action impair the character or quality of the existing community?
No.
No.
Will the proposed action have an impact on the environmental characteristics that cause the establishment of a critical environmental area?
No.
Will the proposed action result in an adverse change in the existing level of traffic or affect existing infrastructure for mass transit, biking, or walkway?
No.
No.
Will the proposed action cause an increase in the use of energy and it fails to incorporate reasonably available energy conservation or renewable energy opportunities?
No.
No.
Will this proposed action impact existing public-private water supplies?
No.
Public-private wastewater treatment utilities?
No.
No.
Impair the character, quality of important historic, archaeological, architectural, or aesthetic resources?
No.
No.
Result in an adverse change to natural resources, for example, wetlands, water bodies, groundwater, air quality, flora, or fauna.
No.
No.
Result in an increase in the potential for erosion, flooding, or drainage problems.
No.
No.
Will the proposed action create a hazard to environmental resources or human health?
No.
No.
So having run through those questions, would entertain from the council a motion to deem this unlisted action as having no environmental impacts or not result in any significant adverse environmental impacts.
So,
Moved by Councilor Barbell, second by Councilor Kelly. Discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Barbell?
yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yeah.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Brody?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
So we're back to the item itself. Prepared to vote? Roll call?
Well, you're not having a discussion on the local law?
Yeah, I think I just asked for one.
Okay.
And asked if they're prepared to vote.
Okay.
Would you like to have any further discussion on the local law? Roll call?
Counselor Barbell?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Brody?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Whereas the Plattsburgh Finance Department. Yes?
Like to make a motion.
Moved by Councilor Gibbs, second by Councilor Barbell to move the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed. Discussion on the item itself.
This motion is discontinued services downstairs?
Yes. In-person payments.
No.
Could there be a provision, I know that your office opens up accounts, et cetera, there'll always be some individual work that we'll always do. I think the sentiment of your idea is to continue to do as much stuff online that we've successfully been doing for about 4.5 months when we were shut down, furloughed, et cetera. Continue to use the lockbox address, continue to encourage people to use automatic bill pay or pay online by credit card, et cetera. But there's always going to be some personalized work that's done on occasion.
So I gotta caution you on the fact that, property taxes are collected roughly between the middle of February and the middle of July. You're gonna have to have those windows open for walk-in payments for that. And maybe even the drop box available, because property taxes are a different animal than the monthly utility payments.
And this was just utility payments.
Right. The point of this, I think, what you're getting at, or what the mayor is getting at initially, is to make it more like an ISAC, where there isn't a payment window, and the payments are all gonna go to one place. And if you wanna do something locally, you basically can't do it unless you're gonna do it through a drugstore with a Western Union payment that's gonna add $1.50 to your charge, and basically not provide the city with much payment information except for the amount and the name on the account, which is gonna cost 3 or 4 minutes to apply each payment that way. So this is targeted at getting more payments through our lockbox in Hicksville, New York. Well, provided that happens, we could possibly negotiate a lower rate, and I would assume it's going to be pretty easy to negotiate a lower rate if we triple the volume of our monthly payments through the lockbox, and get down to around 50 cents an item as opposed to 81 cents an item. And that'll provide some savings, but it means that all utility payments are not going to be dropped or delivered. They're going to have to be mailed to the lockbox, not even mailed to the city.
Or paid online. I mean, we put an awful lot of effort into allowing people to pay for free online and automatic.
Yeah, there's a lot of online payments that are going on, but not many, like $1,290 a month go through credit card and $1,400 a month are e-check, and there's 580 auto pay accounts now, from 407 back in March. So at that rate, it's still going to take about 35, 40 years for us to get everybody signed up for auto pay, but at least there's 580 of them now. And people call in all the time about how to make payments, and we help them with that. So the phone aspect of this is in the resolution. It's already there, and the support's already there.
And I think, to me, this resolution really came about as a result of, the pandemic hitting the city, causing us to shut the doors and realizing that there are other ways and thinking about other ways to process utility payments. And Richard, I thank you for looking at this and coming up with some of these ideas, how to do this. And what it is to me is a very good example of creating government efficiency. Re-examining how we've done things in the past, 40 years, whatever it is, and moving to a new way of doing this, which will create, I think, changes in the way the finance office is going to use its staff and do business. I'll continue, and this is one of the things that it encourages me, being on the council, to seek out these kinds of similar examples in other departments in the city that can create and potentially creating savings in all the city departments, and build a consensus that every dollar that's spent comes out of somebody else's pocket. And we need to work our hardest to make sure that dollar is spent the most effective way possible. And I think this resolution is an example of what's to come down the road, I think, with the city as it begins to re-examine the way it does business.
You said there's a fee for every check that they process, or
Every bill.
where they call it the lockbox? Where the lockbox gets mailed?
No. Lockbox payments, there's no fee to the customer, but there is a fee to the city, yes.
And it costs the city right now 81 cents per transaction?
That's right, roughly.
And how many transactions do they process?
About 2,500 a month. And it's stayed that way for a long, long time because the people locally like to come in and pay their bills in person. They like to, used to drive up to the drive-up window at 6 Miller. Now they prefer to use the drop box. But the lockbox is the fastest processing method that we can use because we get an electronic file uploaded that takes 2 or 3 minutes to post thousands of payments, and the money is automatically deposited right into our bank account, each and every day. So it's the fastest and best way to process. However, it's a cultural change, and the only way to force the change, if if we're gonna force it and say we wanna be like nice, just take out the drop box for utility payments and close the doors. But, once again, I gotta caution you, we still have to collect property taxes, and that's a big issue for us. That's $11.5 million a year, and there's a restricted window for doing that. It's not easy to set that up as an auto pay because it only happens for 4 months a year. And there's only 4 installments, and people want to pay it in person, and people want to go to their safe and pull out the cash and bring it down and pay us in person and get a receipt. They'll go to their checking account and they'll write a check for their bank to pull the cash out and come down and pay us in cash just to get a receipt. I mean, that's the difference in how people look at paying their property taxes versus their utilities.
Now, on top of that, you said there's 2,500 roughly that are now using the lockbox.
That's right.
What would the increase be to that?
If we say no utility payments in the lockbox, and we say no mail-in payments to the city and no walk-in payments to the city, approximately 7,000 a month.
7,000 pieces. So that means that lockbox at our present rate would cost us $5,600 a month?
If we get them to drop it to 50 cents.
I would base it upon the present rate.
Oh, the present rate, yeah, that'd be 9,500 items at 81 cents.
I actually think people would then start seeing the beauty of automatic pay, internet pay, automatic deduction from the bank account.
7,700 a month.
$7,700 a month.
Right, at the current rate, but we've never delivered the initial volume that we negotiated with the lockbox company because it's always remained at 2,500 a month. There's been resistance to use it, but if you give them the kind of volume that we're talking about, 9,000 a month, that rate will go down. We'll be able to negotiate that later.
And I'm assuming that the reason we're gonna do this lockbox thing is because we're gonna let somebody go. Reduce labor.
Initially, I would say we have to work on that and see how that works out because in order to get this going, it's not gonna happen overnight.
Do you pay anybody $7,000 a month in that department for working?
That's a strange question, but if you're looking at laying
I'm
somebody
just
off.
trying to compare your numbers. I'm trying to say, okay, we're spending $7,000 a month to have the electronic company process it, and we're gonna intentionally probably replace or lay off somebody. How much is that person that we're laying off make a month? In theory.
If you're to look at it as, let's take the lowest paid individual, last in, first out.
Yeah.
That person's impact on the general fund is $7,300 a year.
$7,300 a year.
A year, because their costs are shared between water, sewer, MLD, and the general fund.
So now we're gonna spend $92,000 a year to save $7,000?
No, the additional lockbox cost above what we're using now, or experiencing now, reduced to 50 cents per item, would be about $4,800 more per year, prorated once again between general fund and the other funds. And that means the net savings for letting a person go will be about $2,500 a year for the general fund.
$2,500 savings.
Yeah, across the board, it'd be about 17,000, affecting all of the funds. And that's the difference between that person's total pay versus the $32,000 increase in the lockbox processing. About 17 grand net savings across the board.
But we're not talking about just general fund. You know, if the cost reduces, it reduces for water and sewer, and it reduces for
That's what I
MLZ.
just said.
It reduces for all of them.
17,000.
So let's not look at it just as the general fund costs here. There's a cost across all those, even though it's a fee
and that cost-
service, fee for
once again,
service,
that
and the
cost would be
others, you want to reduce that
$17,000
cost as well.
Yeah, the cost to all funds
Right.
for this change would be 17,000, or the savings would be 17,000, sorry.
Any
So
further
it would put us
discussion?
on the plus side per month?
Huh?
It would put us on the plus side per month of 17,000?
Across the board in all funds, general, water, sewer, and MLD. The general fund only 2,500.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Counselor Barbell?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Brody?
No.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
Resolved in accordance with the request, therefore the common council approves establishing capital project H5110.76, 2020 public service buildings for $385,000 to be funded by the city's water, sewer, and general funds and from a grant from the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York for $300,000.
Moved by Councilor Moore and second by Councilor, just one, Bartle. And you raised this in your previous meeting, I know.
Well, I just want to give my opinion on the windows.
Yeah.
You know, it is a substantial cost to replace all the windows, but we do have a grant for $300,000, and if we can replace 2/3 of the windows, or at least half of the windows, I think we should move forward with it, because the grant is there now. Who knows what happens in the future? And these windows are probably older than me. So, that's not saying much for the windows.
The building isn't older than you.
Thank goodness.
It was built in 1920.
But anyway, I think it's important that we, you know, I think sometimes we look at completing the whole project at the entire cost, sometimes when it might be better to just keep doing it. I know the house I lived in before, you know, I didn't replace all the windows at once because it was too expensive. So, and these are huge windows, so it's gonna take a while to get them all, but anything we could do, especially with grants and the situation with New York State, I think it's a good idea to proceed with it. That's my opinion. I'm not explaining it very well.
I agree.
And the windows were, the grant for the windows were 300,000 of this 385,000, correct?
That's correct.
And then the other 85,000 is a new ramp for the fire station number 2, is that correct?
30,000.
And then there was $50,000 of building improvements that DPW wanted to use to update their building on 215 Idaho. They got some garage doors that are dilapidated, not opening anymore, and a few other things that they want to look at on their heating system.
Okay.
We want the plow trucks to go out this winter, we need to get them.
There has some good garage doors, okay. That sounds pretty reasonable.
Any further questions?
Just one last comment. These three items were in the capital expenditure plan at the beginning of the year. So that's why it was presented this way.
So they are budgeted,
Well, see, that's not a budget, that's a plan.
a plan.
By the approval right now, that becomes an appropriation that says we're going to spend this money this way, and can either be capital funds raised through debt, or as in the case of the dormitory grant, the $300,000 coming in that way. We have to create a capital project to do the spending, which is where you authorize the appropriation.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Roll call?
Counselor Bartel?
Yes.
Counselor Kelly?
Yes.
Counselor Gibbs?
Yes.
Counselor Brody?
Yes.
Counselor Moore?
Yes.
No follow request at this time. Are there any resolutions for initial consideration? Any new business or additional council reports?
I just have one comment. I didn't want to bring it up for discussion, but I wanted to thank the landlord group for the work that they did. It started out a little rocky, but we all worked through the process, and I think it turned out to be something that we could all live with. And I guess that's the goal with the council, and I'm sure the landlord group. So thank you. Looking through this, and I'm giving up. Thank you.
And I'm still following up on the employee of the month idea, the employee rewards program for cost savings idea. The city charter, we're supposed to get a copy of the city charter where we have the special assessment needs, where we were able to tap into the special assessment for the city parking. It's not in the book. I've read the entire book now. And I think Dean was going to get me a copy of that. I thought we asked about that 3 weeks ago. And I still want to pursue that.
Julie's gathering information on the employee incentive plans. Pulling together information she used to have where she worked before, plus from new sources.
Cool.
We'll get that to you probably next week.
All right.
Thank you. Any other new business or council reports? Any closing public comments on any topic of mutual interest? Please come forward.
Thank you for a few minutes to address the council tonight. I don't know how often this happens, but I'm actually here to commend you on a decision that you made recently. Your union did not renew the contract of police or so-called school resource officers serving in Plattsburgh City Schools. I'm myself a graduate of Peru Central. My niece and nephew currently attend Stafford Middle School, and although I live locally, I serve as the Vice President of Academics for Partnership Schools. We're a network of Catholic schools serving communities in Harlem, the South Bronx, and Cleveland, Ohio. And there, our schools have proudly served their communities for as long as 150 years without the presence of law enforcement in their buildings. I want to specifically address a few claims that were made by Assistant Superintendent Baruti in the Press Republican recently, where he accused this council of playing political games in their decision. I feel this greatly diminishes the deeply considered, research-based, and ethical position taken by members of this council. Mr. Baruti claimed the officer presence is in large part due to preventing an active shooter situation. We know that criminology research tells us that SROs are not an effective prevention against these tragedies. It would be irresponsible, I think, to our community to imply that they are. A recent study evaluating nationally representative data found that schools with SROs are actually more likely to experience a shooting, despite not being more violent. And then in schools that did experience shootings, tragically, the number of injuries and deaths was 2.5 times higher if the school was staffed with an SRO. What else does criminology and sociology research tell us about staffing schools with police officers? Arrest rates for disorderly conduct among students is 5 times higher. These arrests are almost never for violent offenses. The normalization of SROs in our children's schools over the last several decades has effectively and at scale across our country led to the criminalization of common adolescent behaviors like writing on desks, pulling out cell phones in class, backtalking, and it's students of color, students with disabilities, students with economic disadvantages that we know suffer these punishments disproportionately, more frequently, and much more harshly. We also know that early contact with the criminal justice system actually increases offending amongst youth as they age. So what Mr. Baruti unfortunately refers to as Councilor McFarland's non-factual diatribe is in fact quantifiably true. It's our nation's leading criminology experts that are telling us that this is the case. In fact, the presence of SROs are creating the conditions for the very outcomes that we're trying to avoid, that we're told that their presence is intended to prevent. School district leaders like myself, Mr. Baruti, must take with grave seriousness the data indicating police presence in school also negatively impacts student achievement, makes students feel less safe and more vulnerable, sows mistrust between students and the adults that are at the helm of their school buildings and their school cultures. I believe that this cannot be what any well-meaning educator wants or believes is just for their kids. Just recently in Colorado, police threatened criminal charges against a 12-year-old boy after he picked up a Nerf gun during a remote art lesson. This action was taken after administrators consulted with a school site SRO. His parents report that he is traumatized, that he no longer wants to attend school. And this is one of the more benign examples our country has seen of over-policing in our communities. But it echoes of much more extreme incidents and reflects failed principles that are at play in our education system. So I just want to say thank you for your unanimous decision. I think it was bold. I think it was profoundly consequential. And I think it's a critical step in protecting the liberties of our children and restoring the freedoms of childhood back to our youth. It's made the social contract that we've entered into as a community much stronger. And I am hopeful that my home district of Peru Central will follow in the good example of this council along with other school communities in the North Country and the nation.
And just to be clear, I don't think my colleagues in your vote banned SROs by any means, encourage the school district to look at other avenues to provide SROs if they wish, was the sentiment.
I didn't use a language ban, I just said you voted
Yeah,
not to
I know,
renew.
yeah, that's right.
You voted not to renew the
But I think there's
contracts.
a lot more being attributed to your decision than they actually had really made. And I think unfairly, and I thank you for your defense of my counsel. Any other individuals like to please come address the council?
Thank you. Timing is impeccable here. My name is Matthew Favreau. I live on Dorchester Drive. I'd like to speak about the school resource officer also. And I have a lot of questions, some of which you probably can't answer tonight. I have 3 children that go to elementary schools in the city, and I have a wife who works in the elementary schools. I think the decision not to have a school resource officer has put my family at risk, and I don't understand it. The reasons from this council were, and I'll quote Mr. McFarland, I wish he was here, "It does not make our schools more safe, and it certainly does not help our students." He further said it's commonly referred to as the school to prison pipeline, what a school resource officer does. That shows me that there is a complete lack of understanding of what the school resource officers do in our schools. I understand there's studies nationally, pro and con, and there's a lot of statistics pro and con. But what should be important to this body is what happens in our schools, what our school resource officers do, what they don't do, and what they're not allowed to do. They're not allowed to make arrests. They cannot arrest anybody. I don't know if Officer Wolf is, Officer Scott is here. He's one of our school resource officers. He's never made an arrest in a school. Officer Charlie Wolf was here earlier tonight. He had to leave. He is a police officer assigned to work in the schools. He can and has made arrests. In his 3 years in that position, he has made 16 arrests. 6 of those were for violations of the education law, meaning a student is not going to school. The function of that arrest, signed by the school principal, the complaint signed by the school principal, is to get the student to start coming back to school, to get services in that student's home so that he or she can come back to school. That's the exact opposite of a school to prison pipeline. It keeps the student engaged in school where he or she is supposed to be. 6 other of his arrests were for things that happened outside of school. He made the arrest because when it was going to happen, he knew the student through his work in the school, and he made the arrest for petty larcenies or other things, having nothing to do with anything that happened at school. He was just the appropriate officer to make the arrest. 2 of his arrests were for things that happened at school. 1 was a student walking into the high school making a terroristic threat. That's an appropriate arrest, I think. The school principal called the city police. They dispatched Officer Wolf because he had prior knowledge of this student. The other one was for an assault that happened at the high school. Again, Officer Wolf made the arrest, not the school resource officers. They're not permitted to make arrests. They don't walk through the halls looking for contraband. They don't take drugs off students. That is not what they do. They form relationships with students so that students can, 1, respect law enforcement, which I think is incredibly important right now, and so students have somebody else to talk to. The city schools have also implemented a program whereby it's called the Extra Care Program, or the Handle with Care Program. If a parent is arrested overnight, if there's a drug problem at home, or if there's something going on in a student's household that law enforcement knows about, their liaison to the school is a school resource officer, so that that person can tell the principal or somebody in the school, hey, this is what's going on in Susie's home. She might need some extra care. This is what you need to watch out for. That's an incredibly important thing to do for children who have a lot going on at home, who are vulnerable, who need extra help. When COVID was happening, and the city school shut down like every other school, and it was all online homework and all online work being done, there were many students that just didn't log on, didn't get work done, couldn't do anything, and who the school couldn't even get a response to. They'd make phone calls, nothing would happen. The school resource officers would drive to those students' home and find out what's going on. Can we help you? What do you need? Do you need Wi-Fi? Do you need a laptop? Do you need me to bring lunches every day? And they started doing that to these students who otherwise would have been completely left behind. They're trained in de-escalation. My wife happens to work in an 811 classroom, which is significantly difficult behaviors to work with. She's there with a teacher and another aide. So there's 3 adults and 8 students in this classroom. At least once a week, they have to call for crisis, and the school resource officer is brought in to de-escalate a potentially very violent, potentially physically violent situation in a classroom. No arrests are made, no referrals to PINS, the youth probation department are made. The officer is trained in de-escalating potentially harmful behaviors. And once that happens, the officer then forms a relationship with that student to help make sure that those behaviors either get addressed and services are entered into this for the student and the family, or these things don't continue to happen at school. It's the exact opposite of a school to prison pipeline. That's just a comment that has no factual basis in what happens in our community and at our schools. It's never happened. It makes no sense. This board has twice prior to this ratified this contract. What has happened in the 2 years since you ratified the last contract in our schools that you think means that we should not have school resource officers right now? What's happened in our schools? I'm aware of nothing, and I've been involved in these schools basically my whole life. I grew up here. I went to these schools. My kids are in these schools. My wife works here. I'm in tune to what's going on. Did anybody from this council speak to a board member, an administrator, a principal, a teacher before making this decision? I've spoken to over 100 in the last 2 weeks since this decision was made. Not one of them thinks you made a good decision.
Favreau, time is running.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Any other like, please come forward.
I appreciate what you said, sir. Okay, I know what's going on because all this movement that's going on with Black Lives Matter, I've been watching the news. They started pulling the officers out of schools because of this stuff too, okay? So I talk to my kids. My kids are African American. I ask them how they feel about resource officers at the school. They feel safe with them there, okay? I told them they're not there no more, okay? Like I have talked to Officer Miller many, many times about what we could do to help this community out. Having resource officers at the school is one of the biggest things that I feel safe for my kids to be there. Excuse what you said about the projects, the people, the poor people that live in the projects, please don't use that. They're low income, okay? Yes, we need officers at the project. I want the kids that live in the projects to start feeling safe with the police presence. With everything that's going on right now, the kids are scared too, okay? These officers can be available for these people. Okay, everybody has different visions of what's going on. I'm working with everybody best I can to try to build trust with officers. As a black father, I should say, no, we shouldn't have no resource officers at the school because of what I see on TV where they're hitting the kids and stuff. But I don't see that. I see this as a chance for our kids to start communicating with officers and start building trust again. But what you guys did, I believe that was the biggest mistake by taking them out right now. Because like he said, I've talked to many people, and many people cannot believe that the city, the community did not get a vote on this. I believe that we should have been able to vote and put our opinion in it too. And that's all I got to say. And the public safety panel, we are short a member, I guess. And I'd like to see we nominate Officer Miller, Brad Miller, to be part of the board. Thank you.
So any other members of the public, please come forward.
I apologize for my outfit, but I just got done work and got here in time. But I'm the medical director for Plattsburgh City School District. I'm Jill Silver. I live up Trafalgar Drive. And I've had the opportunity to work with the SROs several times, and it's been scary several times. I've had students suicidal. They're telling me they're going to, hurt themselves with a knife. They're going to elope. Parents aren't coming to get them. They're there to help me keep them. We had to do a shutdown for the school, or they lock in, or and then make sure everybody was safe at the school. We have people with drug use, and we have to get them to the hospital. So there's been numerous times I pop in. The nurses call me, but I pop in a lot. I have 2 daughters too, so I want my kids to feel safe. This college is right by there too, so people can easily go around. I mean, even like the Oak Street and other schools, there's some streets that there's a lot of traffic that it just scares me for having the kids. And then seeing what happens at the school. I initiated Stop the Bleed at the school. I don't ever have to use it, but I initiated that with the school district a while ago, and all my nurses are trained in it. But so I'm here as part of the board, part of the school, and their medical director, having been with them. And work with them, and I really hope that things can change and we can put them back in action. And we did have all that beeping. We had students and parents and all that trying to support their getting started again.
Thank you. Any other individuals like to please come forward?
Good evening. Members of the council and mayor, I came here tonight to introduce myself and just kind of tell you what I actually do. My name's Charlie Scott. I'm one of the 2 school resource officers that have been in the school district for the last 2 years. Just a little background about myself. I proudly served with the city police department up until March of 1998, retired after 20 years as rank as detective. 5 of those years I spent assigned to the Plattsburgh Housing Authority. I maintained a satellite office full-time in the Ted K Community Center. So I had some experience working with all ages of school-age children, kindergarten all the way up through high school. I got offered this position about 5 months after I retired, and I've done it for the past 2 years. It's something that I really enjoy and I'm pretty passionate about, and I really think that with having my own children in schools, and I think it's something really important. So I just wanted to have the opportunity to come in and tell you what my day consists of. Because listening to the meeting and some of the comments about what my role is in the school were just off base and not accurate. So my day starts out, I'm assigned to the 3 elementary schools in the city, Momont, Oak, and Bailey. I pick one of those schools to start out my day randomly. Most of the time, the building administrators and the staff don't even know where I'm going to be, and I do that on reason that, you know, you want to keep your location random. You don't want to become predictable. So whatever school I pick, I get there prior to arrival. I'm outside of the building in pretty much in any type of weather. Middle of winter, rain, I'm outside. I stay outside for about 30 minutes, greeting all the kids as they're coming in. I help with crossing guard duties sometimes if a crossing guard book's sick and there's no one to cross the kids safely. I'm out there talking to parents, talking to them, finding out if they have any concerns about stuff. During the course of my day, I go into the school. I have an office, or a lot of times I'm just walking around the hallways, sticking my head in the classrooms, checking on things. I have a radio with me that's the school radio, so I'm aware if there's any crisis calls or any issues that come in through the office that need to be checked on. I maintain regular walks around the school, the exterior, checking windows, checking doors, make sure nothing's unlocked, because most of the schools have pretty easy access from the public into the school, and during the school day, there are lots of kids outside on the playground. So I go outside and I talk to the kids. I'm out, have a presence on the playground. I throw a football around with them. I, kick a soccer ball. I am not making arrests. I'm not allowed to make an arrest. I am not looking for contraband, nor am I confiscating contraband. I am not interrogating any children. In my opinion, my presence actually decreases the amount of time that the uniformed patrol officers spend in the schools. Because I'll be exposed or involved in an incident that, with my experience, I could de-escalate that, where I could say, we don't really need to have a uniformed police officer come in, or 2 or 3 of them. We can handle this way. And so my presence actually decreases the student contact or parent contact with uniformed police. I can tell you in the 2 years I've been doing it, I can't remember one negative remark from a staff member, a parent, or a student about me being in the building. Actually, I have parents come up to me when I'm there at arrival and dismissal, and they thank me for being there. So I spend my day doing that. I assist in fire drills. I assist in lockdown drills. I go into classrooms, especially with the younger kids, and I talk to them about lockdown drills, because there's a lot of anxiety about lockdown drills and why we're having it. And I explain why we're doing that. I go and sit and I have lunch with the kids. I respond to crisis calls, but I do not enforce any of the school rules, nor am I involved in any discipline of a student in the school. That's completely left up to the school staff. I usually end my day, I'm at one of the 3 different schools at dismissal. Again, I'm outside, I'm helping with traffic if anyone has been to Momont or Oak Street School at dismissal. I go outside and I monitor traffic. I make sure the kids are getting picked up safely and the traffic is flowing through. And the whole, am I done?
Just wrap up.
Okay. So the other aspect was the part of me being armed. I think everyone understands what my uniform looks like. It's not a police uniform. It's a polo and khakis. I am armed, and the reason I am armed is that, God forbid, there was the awful situation where somebody came to a school with intent to harm children or kids, and I was in the building, I would be the first line of defense to protect those children and protect those parents. Even in the best case scenario in the city of Plattsburgh, response time could be 2 to 3 minutes, and historically, most of these incidents are done in 2 to 3 minutes. So all those things considered, I would say that my presence is certainly enhancing the safety of children, and I would wholeheartedly respectfully request that you reconsider your vote on this contract. Thank you.
Any other individual like to please come address the council?
I apologize for my chicken scratch. I didn't plan on speaking tonight, so I'm a little ill-prepared. My name is Seth Silver. I guess I'm approaching the council tonight as a police officer. I work at SUNY Plattsburgh for about 25 years now. I'm a father of 2 girls, and I'm also a resident of the city of Plattsburgh. I just wanted to say that I think that decision was to stop having the SROs in schools abruptly was very short-sighted, in my opinion. It was based on poorly done and little research. As a police officer, I've heard, I've seen, I've been around school resource officers a substantial amount. I've seen awesome interactions with them and students. Their ability to relate to students is beyond mine in a shirt and tie. It's beyond a uniformed police officer. And like you said, they wear polo shirts, khakis. They're very approachable. They get along with the students. They get along with the faculty and staff, and they know them. And when there's an issue in the school or there's a need for them, they're there. And they're able to relate to people, and they're able to help people. I have never, in Plattsburgh, they don't make arrests. They're not there looking in the hallways for violations and grabbing people. They don't do that. That's not their job. They're there as first responders, and they're there to diffuse situations, and they do a great job at it. And I mean, in my notes here, I said, if this weren't the case, and they were in the school causing harm and locking kids up, and the school district simply wouldn't want them. And that's not the case here. The district appeared to be blindsided by this decision, and they, in fact, do want them, as do the residents and parents and teachers and staff in the buildings. Just the last thing I would touch on is, yes, they do great community work, and yes, they did outreach during COVID, and they're familiar with students, and they help out. There is the other issue of arming. And I remember as a SUNY police officer back in the 90s, we were not armed. We are now, and there's very good reason for that. That's because, unfortunately, sometimes things happen. Students, either college students, elementary students, middle school students, bring weapons to school. Students cause harm. Other people, we had an incident in Ohio. Other people in Connecticut come and cause harm to children and to schools, and they are what's known as a soft target. There's a lot of soft targets in schools. So in order to combat that, we harden the target. So if we can put an armed police officer in that school, that can cut that response time down and help everybody. That's why we're armed on the campus, and that's why it makes, in my opinion, and going through the training and the activities we've done, that's why it makes perfect sense to have these officers in the school. That's really all I had. So thank you.
And again, to remind everybody that I don't think the council said there could not be SROs. They did not ban SROs or stop having SROs. There are avenues to still have SROs if the school district chooses, just to be very clear on that.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the public, please? Seeing none, do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilor Barbell, second by Councilor Kelly. Roll call.
Councilor Barbell?
Yes.
Councilor Kelly?
Yes.
Councilor Gibbs?
Yeah.
Councilor Brody?
Yes.
Councilor Moore?
Yes.
Thank you all very much for coming out and commenting. Appreciate it.